So wanted to come to you live on the topic of playing the long game. So what's that all about? Um, in the Urban Dictionary, they're talking about the long game, not meaning like a really long pass in a football game, instead of the short game where you hand off the ball and you run it. It's about that long pass going long, right? But the Urban Dictionary is taking that phrase and using it differently now in our language and culture, which really means about really having that long-term focus or long-term strategy for our business, our life, etc. I like that, the long game. What's the problem with the short game? So I want to tee up kind of the problem around the short game and why playing the long game is the better game to play, and then give you some tips on how to win that long game. But the problem with the short game, and I played it myself for a lot of years, so I recognize it. So I recognize it a lot. So I can speak really well to both games, the short and the long, because I can say that maybe a decade of my leadership experience was playing as a leader in the short game, and then playing as a leader for more than a decade in the long game. And now working mainly with leaders to really only think about and plan for and strategize and execute the long game. So what is it about this short game that is problematic, or what would make you think that maybe you don't have a long game strategy? Well, I'll see this. So we assess a lot of organizations. So we're in a lot of places. We're checking out how they operate, right? What goes on day to day in organizations? What are their strategies for the future? How are they structured or organized to get the work done day to day as well as in the future? And we see a lot of short game going on, so that's what we see most of. In fact, a lot of, too much of. So that's kind of why we're talking about it. So I've had some recent experiences with kind of being really close to the short game again. So a couple months ago, I was having lunch with a group of senior leaders, and I just sat there as an observer because, I wasn't one of them. I didn't know what was going on day to day in their organization. I was just a guest for lunch. And of course, their conversation turned to work, right? And I'm just observing. And what I observed was almost everything they were talking about were things that and they were problem solving around it. What should we do about this? What should we do about that? And almost everything they were talking about, everything they were talking about, not just about everything they were talking about were things that employees, maybe a night shift supervisor, at best the department leader, should have handled, right? But here it is, the conversation, the work of the senior executives to be problem solving, spending their lunch hour around reactive day-to-day operational issues, okay? And this is the same group that, really didn't have a plan for the future, a long-term plan, let alone a short-term plan for the future, etc. So by default, what do you play when you don't have a long-term plan or a long game plan? You play the short game. It's just the default, okay? And so I'm sitting there in this conversation, and it almost made me nauseated, like I lost my appetite, because when I sit with a group of senior leaders, I want to talk about the future. I want to talk about big strategies and how to get there and what their role is and how to engage their employees and their teams and their leaders to get there. And I mean, they're just in the mud. They're just rolling in it, and it's things that shouldn't be on the minds of senior leaders, yet it was totally consuming them. And they actually seemed quite delighted by, being engaged in this conversation of fixing all of these things. So, I'm a recovered one of those. So, like I said, I can recognize this because I was there as a leader early in my career, because I didn't know any better, right? When I first entered into leadership, that's how it was done. That's what got done. That's how things operated. And I thought that was kind of the way, right? Until I experienced something different. That was the long game. So sometimes leaders, even at that highest level, don't even know there's something different than that short game. And also what I mean by that short game too is, for instance, you know, if I go into an organization and I see that another thing I might look at is the administrative team agenda or the board agenda, and I'll see what are they spending their time on. And again, if they're very broad focused, operationally focused, reactive focus, etc., at those levels, then I know there's likely not much of a long game going on. It's day-to-day operations, status quo, reactive kind of stuff. So that is the short game. So the short game, you know, I've even seen it driven where the annual budget decides the short game, the strategy. So, I mean, that's their strategic planning process, is all the leaders put in their requests for capital budgets and projects to be funded. And it's always, you know, 10 times more than can actually be afforded. And so whatever gets approved there all of a sudden becomes the strategy of the organization for the next fiscal year. Well, that is the short game. That is the wrong approach, folks. So having a long game strategy and then aligning that to a short-term strategy, it is appropriate, but just having that short game going and running all the time, so it's very reactive. Also, you know, so budget may drive the strategy and it's short term, it's a fiscal year, and then the whirlwind drives where energy and focus goes. Okay, so when you are playing the short game, it is very reactive. It's often, you know, very focused on too many things that are small, minute issues. It's still very time consuming, etc. So like I said, I played that game for a decade of my career, and it's just as exhausting. It may be more exhausting, to be honest. It may take more time, energy, and focus to be playing the short game without all the rewards, right? So you got all that energy, you got all that activity, yet, you know, you're spinning your wheels. And I can say that to be true in my career, that, you know, a decade of my leadership career flew by playing a short game. And if you really looked at that organization at the start of those 10 years and the next 10 years of those series of short game kind of things where there really was no long-term strategy, etc., is, you know, there really wasn't much of a difference in 10 years. In fact, if anything, probably was a little bit worse. I know it was. Actually, the trends were showing it was getting worse. So it wasn't getting better over those 10 years by this spinning and series of short games. But contrast that to when we learn to play the long game, right? And the long game is focused on, you know, where do you want to be years from now? Not one fiscal year from now, not 12 calendar, you know, months from now, but where do you want to be in years? That's the long game. You know, and it reminded me, you know, I knew I was planning this topic for this week because it's been on my mind. And so a few days ago, my daughter, who's home from college, she's like, let's watch that documentary about the Red Wings and, you know, the Russian players on the Red Wings back in the 90s, 80s and 90s, and when they first came on board. And so that's a really cool documentary. Very, you know, I'm a hockey fan and I'm from Michigan, so Red Wings are my team. So that was exciting for me. But, you know, that club's been around. It was one of the original teams, but they had this long stretch from the 50s until the 90s where they had no Stanley Cup championships, right? So here they are in the business, and being at the pinnacle of that business is winning the cup. And they had this huge long stretch of no cup, right? So not bringing the cup home to Detroit. And so they planned a transformation, right? They planned this big turnaround. And it wasn't a one-year turnaround story, right? There wasn't a short game about this. You know, every season mattered, but every season, every decision made across a period of years was all about this turnaround, right? And not just a turnaround of a hockey team, but a city, right? A city. And so I got chills just thinking about it, right? So that kind of stuff, you guys, doesn't happen by accident, and it doesn't happen by a series of these small little short games that have no real connection to this long-term plan, this long-term vision, this thing you want to create that is way better. So you can go across 10 years and really make no difference and work just as hard and, you know, feel just as tired at the end of a day, a week, a year, etc., without a lot to show for it. Or you can, create this amazing long game and play it. And when you do, wow, then your energy that you're putting into it, your efforts you're putting into it. And so, it took 15 years, actually watching that documentary, it took 15 years to turn around that program, right? It took 15 years, right? But they had a plan to do it, and there were steps they were taking all along the way. And then when they got there to that top, they won back-to-back Stanley Cups, both of them sweeps, right? And so what an amazing, and I'm not like spoiling the story because it's out there for all of you to know, but I watch the documentary. It's pretty cool. And then think of this short game, long game kind of concept in mind. So if we're going to win the long game, let's say in healthcare, right? So let's say your healthcare department or division, and in particular entire organization or system or whatever, and you want to look different 10 years from now, right? You don't want the next 10 years to go by and you just be in the same place you were 10 years ago, right? You just don't always want to be in the same place because you're just spinning your wheels. It's just not fun. It's not rewarding. And our patients don't deserve us to stay there, right? To be stuck there. They want us to be progressing. They want us to be moving forward. They want us to be serving them better, right? Always better and better. And so that takes a long game, guys. In a series of all this spinning around in the whirlwind or planning our strategies based on what we're going to budget for this year, that's just not going to bring about the change that our patients deserve in quality and safety and the offering of services and the quality and excellence of services that we deliver and the places where our employees and providers want to work and where people want to be attracted to work. That doesn't happen in an organization that's spinning in this short game kind of philosophy. So the first part, obviously, of creating a long game strategy is to do just that, is to create a vision for where you want to be further out than this next year. Lots of organizations have visions and missions, whatever, but I can tell you that often, if you ask an employee, if you ask a leader, even if you ask a board member, a senior leader, and you ask them what's the mission and vision of this organization, which is supposed to guide the future, and you ask them what it is, they may not be able to answer you. When I was playing that short game, that happened to us. A new CEO candidate came in. We were, recruiting for a new CEO. He wanted to meet with different stakeholder groups as part of the interview process. And at that meeting, when they say, do you have any questions for us? He said, yeah. What's your mission? What's your mission? What are the top 4 or 5 strategies of this organization of where it wants to be 5 years from now? To see if I'm the right guy to take you there, right? Guess what? Nobody could answer him. Employees couldn't answer him, doctors couldn't answer him, board members couldn't answer him, leaders couldn't answer him. We hired him. Guess the first thing he did? He put in a strategic planning cycle. He put in a long-term plan. He started working with us to bring the strategies alive, right? So he started our long game because he recognized just with one simple assessment question that we had no long game going on. So mission, vision, key strategic imperatives that are longer than a year out, that really are out there in 3, 5, 7, 10 years from now is really what we're talking about long game here, right? So if you're gonna play the long game, first you have to figure out where you want to go over the long haul. And that's about strategy, right? And that's engaging your stakeholders, your community, your employees, your physicians, your leaders, etc., to paint that picture for where you want to be. If you want to be wildly successful and transformed and look amazingly different, behave amazingly different, perform amazingly different than you do right now, then you need to paint that picture of what that looks like. And then you need to narrow that focus. What are those 3, 4, 5, 6 at most main strategic imperatives that we're going to commit to over the next 3, 5, 7, 10 years to get to that place? What's the key things, okay? What are the key things? And then everything you do over the next years, you ask yourself this question: is it in alignment with that? If we're spending on money for something, is it alignment with that? If we are spending our time and energy on something, if it's on our agenda, if it's a team, if it's a project, is it aligned with that? We could clean house of teams and committees and meetings in our organizations and cut down agendas in half if we took off all that crap that is totally not in alignment with those 4 to 6 strategies for your long game, right? And I'm going to tell you that one of those key strategies for your long game, if you're a healthcare organization, has to be around your human capital or your culture or your employee experience. Because I'm telling you, in a service industry, your long game depends on that. You will not go far in the long game. The Red Wings did not go far in their long game of becoming a championship Stanley Cup team and bringing back a whole community to rally around that team. They did not do that without a focus on their people. And it's amazing because they didn't even speak the same language, yet they had a culture of championships, right? And so it can happen even at a place like that, right? Where there's those kind of barriers. So it has to be one of your core strategies. And it has to be on a narrow list of 4 to 6 strategies. But once you do that, then everything is in alignment with that. You make all your decisions based on that. Okay, but you guys are saying, okay, there's this day-to-day operational stuff still has to keep going, right? We gotta, while we're working on those long game strategies, we still have to play out the season. The Red Wings still played out the season while they have their eye on that championship future season, right? They had to play out each season. And so you still have to keep day-to-day operations going, but that's how things get different because like I said to you, it's not the senior leaders, it may not even be managers that keep day-to-day operations going. Who is it? The players. They keep playing the game and they keep up-leveling their game with their eye on being part of that future, holding that cup, right? So you gotta bring in tactics that elevate your employees to be part of leading day-to-day operations and contributing to the future at the same time. And in that same sweep, then you're freeing up leaders to focus more time and energy on the future as well. So there becomes this new focus in the organization of who's responsible for what when you're playing the long game. So employees get elevated to the line of leadership to lead day-to-day operations. They get to be empowered to make decisions every day of how to take care of patients, how we should improve care to take care of patients, how we make sure that things keep getting better, be part of employee-driven teams that are focused on improving the culture, improving outcomes, etc. And then leaders shift more of their focus into outward and long-term strategies that get you to those new places in 5, 7, 10 years where employees are just excited to be there, right? To get there with you and be part of it. So everything, once you define those 4 strategies that align with where you want to be in the future, then you align everything to it and you create new owners for it, right? So that really is the foundational piece that has to happen. So many of our partners that have been out there playing the long game, and it's so fun now that we've been in business long enough and we've been part of transformational efforts now for 16 years. It seems weird to think about it now, but for 16 years, I've been playing long game, either as a leader myself or coaching leaders to play the long game. And so now I get to see kind of, what are the factors that lead people to win the long game? So first is that, creating the strategy and the vision for it, creating the alignment and ownership to it. But in particular, what happens in organizations that are succeeding long-term is they get some really core things in place that really bind them together year after year as they're moving towards that long-term future. So for instance, behavioral standards. So this is how we behave around here. A leadership bundle. This is how we lead around here. Service recovery standards. This is how we, at the lowest possible level, least amount of bureaucracy and paperwork, deal with dissatisfaction in our services. So you get these core things that are so key to your success day to day, but they're also aligned and key to your success for winning in that future. And so these core things that get established become so solid and in place, and they're held on so tightly that it would be hard to not recognize them or know them as being important to where you want to go. So we always say that, you know, if you want to be a great organization, you have to elevate how people behave, perform, and contribute. So these standards become how we get to greatness. Is how do we behave to get to greatness? How do we perform to get to greatness? How do we all contribute to get to greatness? And once an organization sets that in stone and gets that in place, they hold on to it tightly. And they, you know, the nursing bundle, the positive communication standards, the behavior standards, the leadership bundle, they put these things so solidly in place that they just hold on tight to it, and they won't let it go. So they'll circle back to it every year as if it's new again, as if it's important. And every time anyone comes into their organization new, right away they learn, this is how we do it around here. And so it's really easy in a long game organization where they put this solidly in place in alignment with their strategies, when they put these high standards of how people behave, perform, and contribute. When they do that, it is just so obvious that it's important, and people can connect the dots. We're great because of these standards. We're great because we uphold these standards. And so they clearly know the connection between how they behave, how they perform, what they do every day, and that great place that's coming up, right? So they know that. There's not this disconnect between how everyone goes about their day and what they do, and that it's getting us closer to that future place, so that everybody knows their role, they know these standards, and we circle back to them often. We just keep going back and going back and going back because they're so important to the results. And so some people think, oh, you got to add something new. You got to keep adding something new. You got to keep, you know, adding something new. No, you go back to those solid things that work, and you just inch out more and more and more performance out of those things. So, because it's true, like when you're dealing with human beings, not everybody is going to, when you say, oh, we have this, you know, we want to be this great organization where people behave in this way to this high standards, how we talk to each other, how we interact with patients, etc. And you put these standards in place, and magically doesn't mean everybody's behavior changes, right? And so when you commit to that, you circle back to it, you circle back, because every day, every year, you want to elevate how we behave. And so that becomes a focus always. And so it's not always about what's new, it's about what's important, and doing it very, very well and circling back to it often. And when new people join you, right away they know what the long game is, they know what the vision and the strategy is, they can speak to it just like anyone else in the organization, even if they've only been there a week, and they learn right away in that onboarding process, this is how we do it around here, and this is why, and this is where it's going to take us. And if you're on our team, this is how we play, right? This is how we play. So the other thing too is in organizations that are playing the long game, then you have time enough to create internal experts, okay? So in short-term games, we don't have a lot of time to create internal experts at anything. The only thing we might be expert at is firefighting, right? The whirlwind queen, or the queen of chaos, or whatever. That might be a title, and that might be what you're an expert at. But in the long game, we have people that are experts at elevating individual behavior and performance, elevating ownership, elevating engagement, acting on strategies for the future, inching out, you know, percentiles of improvement. When you go from here to here and then you want to go up even higher, how do you inch out that last minute bit of improvement that gets you to winning? I mean, but in organizations that play the long game, they have a lot of time to invest in elevating people into those positions of being internal experts. So who are our internal experts on the nursing bundle, on the positive communication standards, on the behavioral standards, on each element of the leadership bundle? Who's our experts in the goal cycle? Who's our experts in grateful leadership, etc.? And so when you're playing the long game, then you have the ability for these internal experts to either rise up or surface or volunteer and be created. And so in organizations that are really winning at the long game, you'll go in there and you'll be able to see very clearly, you know, not just who knows how to do payroll or how to do a schedule or how to do a budget, but you know, leaders who know how to take a problem or take something that's good and turn it to really great, and they absolutely know how to do it, right? and they absolutely know this is how we lead around here, and employees know this is how we own day-to-day operations, and this is how we can also contribute to that future. But that happens in organizations that are in the long game as you start to have, and that's great for sustainability and for, you know, continued getting better and better. So, and you don't have to go from outside to get it anymore. You have all that internal capacity to just keep getting better and better. So, you know, organizations that are playing the long game, when you go in there, it's noticeably different, and you don't have to be there very long to assess, is this a reactive, short game, day-to-day operations kind of organization, or is this a game, is this an organization that's on its path? You know, maybe it's not perfect yet, but you can see that they're clearly playing the long game. They've got the building blocks in place. They've got the plan. They've got the vision for it. They're putting all the pieces in place. And when they do that, guess what? High likelihood they are going to win, right? So I see no winning short games. You know, there might be this little blip where it felt good for a minute, or you thought you had a blip on the screen that looked good, but you know, I don't see any short game kind of organizations if you compare them from a decade ago to now, where they're really that much different. And if anything, I would say they're probably in a worse position. But you look at an organization that is really thinking long term, and they have, you know, some key tactics for how they're going to get themselves there. You know, maybe they don't have it all figured out, but they're better off than an organization that is just reacting and responding to day-to-day urgencies and the whirlwind. So if you're an organization that is kind of playing the short game over and over again, you know, you might want to consider some of these points. I mean, the first point would be is, you know, where's your strategic plan? Where are those key strategic imperatives? And what's everybody's role? You know, who owns what? What's, you know, how are we aligning? How are we getting all that other crap out of the way that isn't important? Or how are we getting ownership into the hands of employees and teams so that they can own some of that, so that more can get done? So I hope you're an organization and you're enjoying the benefits of playing the long game. I just know that as a leader now, having been reformed as a short game leader to a long game leader, I never go back. Never go back. It's exhausting. It's not very rewarding. It's really not what I'm about as a leader, is just leading day to day and status quo. I think leadership is about moving something forward, and that means wildly successful. It means transformational. It means that if you look at where I work and I lead, and 10 years from now, if it isn't remarkably better and different, I'm not doing my job, right? And collectively as a group of leaders or employees, the entire team, if that's the case, I don't want to sign up to work there. That's not what I want to do with my time and energy, and you probably don't either. So I wish you a great career of long game activity. And if you're not playing it right now, get in the long game, because it is fun. It is rewarding. You're still going to work hard, but it's going to be way more worthwhile. It's going to bring much more joy, and you're really going to be making a difference, right? Going to be making a difference, which is why we're here. So thank you everyone for your time today. And if you are wanting more information about what we do at Capstone Leadership that helps organizations play the long game, go to our website, capstoneleadership.net. There is a place there where you can book a call with us, and we'd love to spend some time chitter-chattering about what we do, how we do it, and how we help organizations play the long game and win.